I am so excited to talk to Nina Berkhout about her novel, This Bright Dust from Goose Lane Editions. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. I hope you'll watch us in conversation. I'm going to share a little blurb about the novel, Nina, if that's okay, and then you're going to read the
Yes,
first
sure.
30 lines, and then we're gonna chat.
Great. That sounds good.
January 1939, Abel Dodds is a 27-year-old farmer living alone in a close to abandoned town of Grayley, Alberta. Trapped by poverty and circumstance because of the neglect of the Canadian government, the great dust storms of the 1930s, and the death of his father, Abel survives mostly on eggs and rabbit and on working to make life better for his neighbor Una, whom he loves, and her son Toby. As winter becomes spring, they are obsessed with King George VI and Queen Elizabeth, who are determined to visit Canada despite a looming war. While Abel believes it is a waste of money and a political tactic by the Prime Minister to gain favor, he also knows that the visit will affirm to Una and other struggling Canadians that their existence means something. In the span of a year and a couple of chapters into World War II, Nina Berkhout offers a story of survival, love, destiny, and the dreamless existence for those whose fates may have already been written. With poetic brilliance and stunning visuals, the prairies of wild roses and dust bowls come alive in this bright dust, and you're left asking if history is a book we're all writing, why do we keep repeating the worst chapters?
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you, Allison.
Thank you
Wish I
so
could
much. It
write
was
like
it
that.
was a beautiful book, so I'm
Thank you
excited
so much for that.
to talk.
Wow. That's a hard act to follow. And
I
I'll
know.
just read the first 30 lines. Oh my goodness. Thank you.
And it doesn't have to be the first 30 lines. You can read like if there are 30 sentences that are just to you the
Yeah,
emblematic story, you can do that.
sounds good. I'll start at the beginning.
Okay, thank you.
As the sun broke open on the frozen prairie, Abel Dodds looked out the kitchen window. He saw his past in two buildings, which lay southeast of his fields, in a direction he no longer traveled. The most distant building was the Wishart farm. His old classmate Una Wishart lived there with her son and grandfather and her brother Jake. Between Abel's house and hers lay the second building. The schoolhouse, a solitary whitewashed structure that stirred up unwanted feelings, appeared to float on the plain like a boat on an icy ocean. He preferred to avoid both the Wishart farm and the schoolhouse. The Wisharts were busy enough that he did not often see them. He was mostly alone, which suited him fine. Up until the previous week, that was, when Jake stopped by on the pretext of wishing Abel a Happy New Year. What have I gotten myself into? He now thought, drinking his coffee as the day's first light lengthened on the snow-encrusted dirt. Jake had said that he was again headed south to work as a ranch hand, feeding another man's livestock hay through the cold months, as he had done 3 years running. Ranch pay was decent, and Jake had experience managing stock, as did Abel. Many farmers in the area had once experimented in mixed farming, growing crops and raising cattle. Winters passed when Jake had gone off ranching. A farmhand had stayed on at the Wishart bunkhouse to assist. Sometimes those fellows came over, asking to borrow tools, and Abel obliged and sent them on their way. Jake hadn't said as much, but Abel guessed that retaining a handyman was a luxury they couldn't afford anymore. And since Abel was the only other one around Grayley who hadn't packed it in for the mines, or the Okanagan, or Peace River, besides the Peliquins who were currently off trapping, he supposed Jake had no choice but to call on him. "What's keeping you here, Dodds?" Jake had asked, tobacco bulging from his lower lip as he leaned against the barn door. The question Abel asked himself daily, and asked himself again now. Why did he stick around during these unproductive months? He didn't bother explaining to Jake that what kept him from ranching was the memory of what he'd done in 35. Like other farmers who had to kill off their starving cattle, Abel had slaughtered his own 12 dairy cows. He had betrayed the cows' trust, enticing them out of the barn with a bundle of hay, which he held under their noses. One by one, they followed Abel into the pasture, and he positioned them to take his shot. Jake had done away with the Wishart's beef cattle too. Back when it happened, Abel's neighbor remained unfazed, saying he would bring stock in again when the time was right. In fact, Jake's plans became more grandiose as things got worse. But after walking through his own pasture of carcasses, great brown eyes staring up at him, imploring, Abel decided never again. He did not have the stomach for such carnage, and from then on only worked the land. Stop there.
Amazing. I, for anybody who absolutely loves animals, as I do, as I'm sure you do, Nina, the relationship Abel has with Tansy, the horse, and Elizabeth Moon, the cow, throughout the novel is just, I don't know, it's almost like the heartbeat a little bit, even though there's a lot going on. There's just something beautiful about that relationship, and I completely forgot that that the novel opened with that um, super upsetting moment in time. Um,
Yeah, oh, sorry, I was just gonna say, I
Go
think
on.
often put animals in my stories, probably because I do love them and had pets as a kid, but as I got older, I developed allergies and asthmas and all sorts of things that I can't have pets anymore. And so I guess I can, have relationships with animals in the stories. Maybe
Yeah,
subconsciously, that might be why I had Tansy as such a, significant
character.
character really in the story, close with Abel.
Yeah, yeah, no, she was
Mhm.
beautiful, and she's there on so many important scenes. So I'm grateful for that. And also sorry that you don't get to have animals, but
Yeah.
maybe also a little bit jealous with the life that I have right now. With the way the novel opens, immediately we get a sense of place, of setting, of where we are, if not in Canada, just in North America. And I wanted you to talk about that because the visuals honestly are stunning. The prairies are presented, and I'm going to use something that you say in the novel. The prairies are presented as an idyll in this great poem that is Canada, from the wild roses and the dusty fields, the wise men, and the schoolhouse. You've drawn an incredible place, and I want to talk to you about inspiration and how, from a writerly perspective, you kind of laid it out.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I'm originally from Alberta, so I guess that's the landscape that I grew up in, and I've been gone for a long time, but I still, it's still there. I guess it always stays with you. And I also lived in Manitoba for some years as well. So again, there, just the prairie setting, that landscape, it's for some reason still always calling to me all these years later. And when I began researching about the Great Depression specifically from a Canadian perspective and through Canadian historical accounts and records, I read so much about all three prairie provinces, really. Like there was the Pallisers Triangle region, but it wasn't just Alberta, or it was Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, that whole area that really had these extraordinary stories of communities and resilience and how people banded together to get through this extremely difficult decade when they really, in many occasions, felt almost forgotten by the eastern part of the country, by Ottawa, by the federal government. And so they felt very much isolated and alienated in some respects. But I think that the landscape itself, the land and the relationship of these farmers and communities to the land is it's complex and it is, and it's the land is devastated and there's drought and there's these horrible storms that are almost apocalyptic, much like the ones that we're experiencing today, happening with environmental change, climate change. And so the land is devastated in parts and again for a long period of time. But they still manage to see the beauty in it, and they want very much to stay in this place that they have known all their life and that they love, and it's the only way of life that they have ever known, farming. And so they don't want to abandon that life or that place where they are from, even though it has become a sort of wasteland in many ways, and they're struggling to grow and even have access to water and very, very basic amenities and supplies. And some of those things were provided by the government during the Depression, of course. But there was also this sense of pride, I think, that some of these individuals and families had, and they didn't want to go to the bread line, or they didn't want to go and pick up coal or food or get handouts. They wanted to still manage on their own. So when I read firsthand accounts about the 30s in Canada, it's
Yeah.
extraordinary what some families manage to do with so very little. So that is
Yeah.
what interested me and what I wanted to learn more about.
Yeah. And that isolation really
Mhm.
does get amplified when we consider this looming visit from the king and queen, right? And it kind of
Mhm.
plays throughout the novel, but that Abel feels political, like it's a political move. It's just a tactic. William Lyon Mackenzie King just wants people to forget, you know, the troubles that they're living in, forget that they even exist in some cases, but also in, as you say, that the kind of landscape playing against the political landscape, Abel recognizes that this might be the only way for Una to feel like she exists. This visit from the king and queen, and I wanted you to talk about the political landscape in the novel as well, because there's a
Sure.
lot of criticism, which is fantastic, but there's a lot of kind of feeling like they're not really a part of politics where they are.
Yeah, yeah, and that as well. I had not heard, I didn't know much about the 1939 Royal Tour
Mhm.
at all until I started reading about the late 30s. And I just found it so incredible, really, that this was the very first time a British reigning monarch visited Canada,
Mhm.
and at at a time period where Canada had gone through this difficult decade and war was looming. This is in May of 1939, so just a few months prior to the war. And then suddenly the prime minister has the king and queen coming for a royal visit, and people can't even keep food on their tables. They have no homes. There's poverty. It's such a peculiar time to have this invitation, and then all of this government funding and money and um, cities as well, extravagant expenditures going to this visit. And so I think that the country was very much polarized in their views.
Mhm.
This is, almost 100 years ago, and we're still seeing that today in terms of Canada's relationship with the crown, and so many communities now not wanting to be part of that colonialist commonwealth, and wanting to break away from that. You see it happening, you see it in the news now, but even in the 30s, that was also happening. And so there was this tension throughout the country because no one knew how Canadians would react to this visit.
Mhm.
And no one knew whether Canada would be participate if there was going to be a war. That's
Yeah.
all anyone was talking about. Would Canada participate in an active way? Or Lyon Mackenzie King was saying, no, no, we'll just send supplies. That's all. Farmers will provide, wheat, and we'll send supplies, and that will be our role. But then he has the king and queen come for over 5 weeks. They
Yeah.
traveled across the country, and the reaction, I think, was unexpected because everyone was preparing for demonstrations and protests and riots and possibly violence. And that is, in large part, that is not, in fact, what happened. And it did end up bringing many Canadians together and strengthening Canada in a way at that time when everyone was so feeling so defeated.
Hmm.
And I think that that was quite unexpected. And it's so strange because just I think it was a few weeks ago when our current prime minister again invited the king, and there was this visit. I live in Ottawa, and so I was
Hmm.
looking at the footage and seeing this firsthand. And I went to the park where the king and queen were, and again I was thought, what will the reaction be? How will people? And there were some protests, but at the same time, when I looked on the news and heard accounts, people again were saying how, oh, it's bringing us together. We're engaging in conversations. We feel stronger. We feel united. And so again, it's this strange
Hmm.
repetition of what happened back then.
Hmm.
So I think I've strayed from your question,
No,
but
no, I love it because it just has me thinking about again your characters, right? Because there is this feeling of smallness in
yeah,
not
yeah.
just in Grayley, but this smallness of Canada. And I
Mhm.
think in thinking about the king and queen coming and King Charles recently coming, I think it's this feeling of smallness that we still have as Canadians. Like we need their patronage, you know, we need their love. We need to be cared for by this country that like oddly is geographically smaller and probably, you know,
Yeah.
geopolitically just as powerful, and yet we as Canadians feel small. And so when the king and queen come in 1939 and when King Charles comes in 2025, we're like, "Oh, you're, you know, you're here to care for us, right?"
It's yes, it's fascinating to see and to see how everyone reacts. And
Yeah.
I think that that's very much that. And also maybe in part this sort of there's still even today, I think, this kind of magic mythic element to it because it's
Mhm.
royalty. It's almost from another realm. It's something people don't see, experience, have a sense of ever. And if you have these representatives coming and you even just catch a glimpse, you know, people always say like the way the queen looked at me, or she looked at me and she said one word, and it's like they're recounting something from a mythical, otherworldly realm
Yeah.
almost. And so in this novel, while Abel, the protagonist, he is very much kind of against this royal tour, and he thinks it's, you know, so much money is being spent, and everyone is just suffering, and it's a disgrace, really. His
Mhm.
neighbor Una and her young son, they're really excited because they see the magic in it, and for them, it's the only thing that brings hope, brings them a bit of hope
Yeah.
during this bleak time. It's an escape, really.
Yeah.
It's an escape,
Yeah.
and they don't even
And like
know.
the earliest celebrity sightings almost is the feeling.
Yeah,
Let's talk about characters because there
sure.
are so many incredible characters. Una, Toby, her son, um, uh, who she mysteriously returns with 18 months after leaving. And but we've also got, as you mentioned in the beginning, the Peliquin, Cyril and Lucy and Louis and Freddie and Merle, and even
Yeah.
Una's sister Bryn is a very big part of the novel. Um, if we can't talk about that incredible ending, but I want to talk about characters from a writerly perspective and how you drew them all out and how you imagined them existing in this world.
Okay. Well, I think for this one, the novel prior to This Bright Dust, I had many characters, and
Mhm.
I had never done that before. It was too many. It was tricky, and I after I finished that book, I told myself like never again. My next story, I want it very concentrated. I just want one or two main characters, and that is that. And so I think maybe that's also why had the story in this very isolated setting where the community has completely dissolved and there are only three families left.
Yeah.
There's Abel and then the Wishart family and then the Peliquins. And that's really it. There's no one else around. And that was deliberate, that was intentional because I didn't want too many characters.
Right?
Um, yeah, I wanted the focus to really just be on Abel and the landscape
Yeah.
and the love story with Una. Um, and so I think that I brought her son in, Toby, again, maybe as a symbol of hope. I think that children, when you are writing a child into a story, it's inevitable that that should bring some kind of hope and a lightheartedness to even difficult situations. And I wanted that. I didn't want, even though they're in difficult circumstances, I didn't want this to feel like a super heavy, depressing, desolate story. I wanted there to be a bit of magic and hope throughout. And so that is probably where the idea of having the character of a child came in. And the Peliquin family, this is a family, they live along the railroad line. The town of Grayley is situated, the prairie farming community is situated along the railway line, as many farming communities were and still are. And the Peliquins, this is a couple. His background is French Canadian, and her background is Indigenous. It's not specified if she's Métis or from which Indigenous ancestry, but they have had their farm taken away, and so they live in basically in like a caboose along the railway line. And they are very close friends as well with Abel and with the Wishart family. Um, and those characters came to being, I guess, because again, when I was reading historical accounts of these farming communities and those who were along the railway line, there always are stories as well about road allowance communities, Métis communities who were situated on Crown land along the rails. And that was that was a difficult decision, I guess, in the sense that I knew that that's definitely not my story to tell, of course, but I didn't know whether to include that aspect or not, whether because it didn't feel right not to have that either because
Yeah.
it's it's uh, it's important to the communities living there. And so that is where the Peliquin family came from. I guess from
Mhm.
a writer perspective, I decided no, they need to exist in this story as well.
Yeah. There wouldn't,
So
I don't think it would have been as authentic without Lucy and
yeah.
everything, like every moment that she has where she's interacting with Abel, when Toby gets ill, when
Mhm.
Abel's when Lucy stitches Abel up, like there really is this feeling of like not authenticity, but this feeling of um yeah, that's what it would have been like. There would have been a person and more than likely Indigenous who had the medicine and wherewithal to treat minor afflictions,
Mhm.
whether physical or spiritual or mental. And Lucy really does fulfill that role, but I don't think that it was tropish or in any way inauthentic. Like she really did belong there. And
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
I hoped so. And as well, the story of the Royal 1939 Royal Tour, of course, there were many Indigenous communities involved in that as well. And so she is able to touch on that through her character, the kind of the reaction or her thoughts on that.
yeah,
And we of course had a sensitivity reader, a Métis person who was able to read through and provide a few insights. And so that was really helpful also for that
yeah.
perspective. Yeah.
As a writer, you are, I don't know if you would say that you are a poet first, but you have more collections of poetry than you do novels. So I want to call you a poet first. You can say no. But each chapter opens with these beautiful little extracts from poems attributed to A. D. And I wanted to talk to you about those poems and your
Sure.
decision to open each chapter with those extracts and what they mean to you and the story.
Yeah, sure. Well, Abel, when he's a student, one of the storylines in the novel is he thinks back a lot to his school days when he was in the schoolhouse with Una, and they had a teacher named Miss Kitty,
Mhm.
and she always encouraged. They loved her. All the students loved her, and she just kind of she left one day, and they never really learned what happened with her, but they think back to her and they talk about her a lot, and she. I think she caught Abel writing a poem once in a scribbler or something, and when she saw that, she encouraged it. She encouraged him to continue writing, and so he did so kind of in secret, and when he was doing farm chores and what have you. And then his father also noticed that he was doing this, and so one day his dad left a book on a bale of hay for him, and it was Tennyson's Idylls of the King, and about the King Arthur and the fall of the Arthurian realm. And so Abel is drawn into that storyline, and he also learns that his poems don't have to rhyme. He doesn't have to necessarily follow meter. Even he can just write in free verse, and he finds that liberating. And so every once in a while he writes these little bits of paper and never shows them to anyone. But that is each chapter opens with one of those very, very short poems that he has written. And yeah.
Nice. And I have my entire life pronounced idle, idle, and just
Yeah, I think it's either or.
say that, and I was like, oh yeah, it makes sense that it would not be pronounced idle, but
I think
idle.
it can be either one. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't yeah, and that's so funny because it actually took me, I don't know how many chapters to figure out that AD was Abel Dodds. Like
Oh, good.
yeah, like it really did. There was a I don't know, I don't want to describe it as a disconnect, but there really was this maybe it's a writerly literary thing that you expect poetry that opens up a chapter to be, you know, poetry from somewhere that influences the writing. So when it kind of clicked, and I'm not gonna lie, it was probably more than halfway through the book
Okay.
where I was
Yeah.
like, oh, shoot, I think AT is Abel Dodds. Um, anyway, it was such a beautiful choice and really spoke to your talents as a poet as well as the talent that was put into structuring this book in a really magical
Oh,
way.
that's
So I appreciated that.
That's very kind. I can't take the credit for that, though. I have to say that was my wonderful editor, Bethany Gibson.
Oh,
She, because again, there I thought, do I need to insert this more into the story? How do I, mention his poetry? How do I? And Bethany said, just leave it as it is. Just leave it, keep it subtle, keep it.
yeah,
So she was right, of course. I think it wouldn't have worked if it was more forced, really.
100%. Yeah.
So I have her to thank for that and many other things, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, I always think the name of the editor should be on the cover of every book. I
Yes.
really do. So,
I 100% agree.
yeah.
But yeah, that's amazing. The other large theme, we're just going to talk about religion and war, two tiny little issues that are also addressed in the book.
Yeah.
But religion, Abel has this conflicted feeling about God, whether things are destined to be or fated to be. And I like how this idea of life not being in your own hands, but not in the hands of God either. Like there's a conversation, I think close to the end of the book where I think it's Freddie who talks about the blame, who do we blame for everything going wrong? And if we blame God, if we blame anybody or anything for what is happening, then it never ends, right? That there's this like cycle of blame. And so there's just no point in
Yeah.
playing the blame game at all. But I like how God doesn't necessarily influence Abel in how he thinks and how he lives, but is kind of like there as a big question mark for him and, in this dreamless existence that he has. Can you talk about that and how
Sure.
you positioned
Yeah,
it?
I think he is, throughout he feels very conflicted, and he does carry anger and blame, especially in the beginning of the story. He blames the government, he blames Mackenzie King, and he blames, there's also kind of this rural urban divide. So the people in the city who are not understanding those who live in farming communities, which again is going on today.
Hmm.
The wealthy and the poor divide, no more middle class, all of that we're seeing was happening then. And so he doesn't have faith in very much at all, and he struggles with that really, trying to find some sort of faith or something to believe in. Una, I think, helps him with that, helps him kind of to see the the light and the brighter side of
Yeah.
things. That's where she comes in. Um, so, but otherwise, he doesn't, he maybe believes in some sort of providence or some sort of guiding light, but that's really about it. And there's also, I suppose, tied in with that, his conflicted feeling of whether, like, he has a sense of responsibility, this
Hmm.
greater responsibility. So not only thinking about the self and his desires and needs and his wants, but what is his responsibility to the community,
Hmm.
to the country,
Yes.
what is his role, really? What is his role in the grand scheme of things?
Yeah.
So I think that kind of ties in with his maybe religious struggle as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if
And
that answers.
were his decision, and we won't talk about that, but the the war is looming. The war is kind of presented in the novel as this kind of dark thing. But I love the conversation he has with Merle, who fought in the Boer War. When Merle says, the war that I was fighting was so that we could, we were fighting for our right to dictate how other countries exist. And now this war is trying to stop a man from dictating how his country exists. And I really love that moment because it speaks to not just the futility of war, but these fabricated reasons for them, like there's
Yeah,
always a
yeah,
reason. Not that World War II, I don't in any way want to insinuate that um, the dude in Germany was in any way right to do what he was doing. That's not what I'm saying. But this idea that we can insert ourselves into other countries and say, you need to do things the way that we want you to do things.
that's right.
Right.
Yes. And Abel learns through Una's grandfather Merle about the Boer War, which was Canada's the first foreign war that
Mm-hmm.
Canada was involved in, again through their ties with Britain, in a sense because of Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have World War One going to help Britain again, and then this Second World War that they're all discussing. And so, yeah, and so he's, like, I guess in a sense, blaming Britain for some things and some enforced participation, maybe. But
Yeah.
then having this realization that no matter what, this is mankind, this is humankind, and it's this sort of self-perpetuating. It's not the fault of the king and queen. It's not the fault of the prime minister. It's not the people in the city. It's humanity, I guess, sadly.
Yeah.
And so it will continue. And when he comes to that realization, I think it's almost this release,
Yeah.
you know, and it almost has this sense of peace about it
Yeah.
um, when
Yeah.
he realizes that. So the anger is gone.
Right.
Yeah,
It's always capitalism. That's always the problem. Because there's
yeah,
also
yeah.
that great moment when, and you alluded to it, that moment where he says, we're just trying to make food to live on, to exist on, to
That
thrive, dare say, thrive on, and the country's selling all of their weed, right? Canada's
that's it.
contracting, legally taking all of this wheat and selling it to other countries for money, instead of
Exactly.
feeding their people.
Yeah, and then there was this other bit that I just learned when I was reading about it when the king and queen were coming to Canada in their fleet. They were carrying all of this gold bullion, which again I thought, what in the world? They're coming to Canada with gold bars in the
Yeah,
belly of the ship. Canada has been starving. It's been the Great Depression, and they're coming, but they're bringing that to stack it in the Bank of Canada
just in
before to keep it safe for the war.
yeah, banana.
So there's that too. It's, oh my goodness, it's like, it's hard to wrap your head around some of it, of
Yeah.
course. But yes, I mean, again, this is we're seeing it now. We're seeing, back then it was this concern and this fear. Is there going to be a second world war? And now with the global tensions and different wars happening, everyone is scared of a third world war.
Mhm.
It's happening again. So
Yeah. Yeah.
history repeating itself. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Never. We never learn. Uh,
No.
Nina, I am so grateful for this time with you. This
Thanks,
novel
Allison.
is not just an incredible love story, a beautiful love story, a kind of love story to Canada and the prairies, but it speaks to a lot more of what we've got wrong and right with humanity. But thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. You can go to gooselane.com and find a copy. You can go to indiebookstores.ca and find a copy at your local bookstore. And that is all. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much for having me, Allison, and it was wonderful chatting with you.
I really
Thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much.
Have a
Okay,
good
take
day.
care.
Bye.
You